If you have built up a solid retirement portfolio, do you actually know how much you can safely spend each month without ever running the risk of outliving your money? Hello, I'm Daniel, and I want to talk with you today about something that keeps a lot of people awake at night. You've worked hard your entire life. You've saved, you've invested, you've been disciplined. And now you're approaching your early 60s, wondering if the money you've built up is actually enough to let you stop working. More importantly, even if it is enough, how much can you actually spend each year without running out? How much can you take from that nest egg while still feeling secure? Today, I want to walk you through exactly how to think about this question, not in abstract terms, but by looking at a real situation with real people who were asking me the same thing just a few months ago. Let me introduce you to Michael and Susan. They came to me when they were both 60 years old. Michael had accumulated $920,000 in his 401k account over his working years. He also had a Roth IRA with $35,000 that he'd been carefully building. Susan had done equally well. She had $610,000 in her traditional IRA and another $20,000 in her Roth. Between them, they'd also set aside $50,000 in a high-yield savings account for emergencies, and they'd invested $450,000 in a taxable brokerage account. Add it all up, and their liquid retirement assets came to just over $2 million. On top of that, they owned their home, which was worth about $700,000. So their total net worth was substantial. But here's the thing. Having a large number sitting in an investment account doesn't automatically tell you whether you can retire, or more importantly, how much you can actually spend. When Michael and Susan first sat down with me, they were anxious. They knew they'd done well financially, but they didn't have clarity. They had no idea whether they could retire at 60, or if they needed to wait until 65 or beyond. They didn't know if they should spend $30,000 a year, $50,000 a year, or $70,000 a year. And that uncertainty was eating away at them. So here's how we worked through it together. And this is the same process I want to share with you today, because it works regardless of your actual portfolio size. Whether you have 1 million, 2 million, or even 500,000, the steps are identical. First, we ask them a crucial question. What does retirement actually look like to you? Not what the financial industry tells you retirement should be, not what your neighbor does. What do Michael and Susan want to do every single day? They told me something interesting. They'd always assumed they would work until 65 because that seemed like the normal age. But they'd never really stopped to think deeply about what they wanted. So we spent time on that. We talked about travel. They loved travel. They wanted to go somewhere interesting several times a year. Some trips would be expensive international journeys. Some would be shorter domestic visits. They mentioned health care. They knew that going on Medicare at 65 would change their costs significantly. Right now they're paying for individual health insurance, and it's not cheap. We also talked about their grandchildren. This is where things got emotional. They wanted to be generous with their grandchildren's education. They were thinking about helping with college, maybe establishing some educational savings accounts. They mentioned cars. They have a tradition of helping adult children and grandchildren with vehicle purchases every few years. Then we did something really important. We went through their actual expenses, not estimates, not guesses. We looked at their bank statements and credit card statements from the past year. We itemized everything: groceries, utilities, insurance, entertainment, charitable giving, everything. And from that, we got a picture of what their real spending baseline was. It turned out to be about $48,000 per year. But then we layered on the retirement-specific items. Health insurance before Medicare became available. That was going to be roughly $1,200 per month, or $14,400 annually. Travel expenses were higher than their current spending. They were planning 3 substantial trips per year, which would run about $24,000 annually. The helping with grandchildren piece, education contributions, vehicle purchases, that looked like about $8,000 per year for at least the next 15 years. When we added it all together, they were looking at roughly $95,000 per year to live the retirement they actually wanted. Not the bare-bones retirement, not the extravagant retirement, just the real, honest, meaningful retirement they wanted to live. Now here's where Social Security becomes absolutely critical to the conversation. Michael was born in 1962. His full retirement age is 66. Susan was born in 1963, so her full retirement age is also 66. If Michael were to claim Social Security at 62, his benefit would be lower than if he waited until 66 or even until 70. We looked at different scenarios together. If Michael claimed at 62, his estimated benefit would be around $2,400 per month. If he waited until 66, it would be about $3,400 per month. If he waited until 70, we were looking at around $4,500 per month. Susan's numbers were similar, with her full retirement age benefit coming in around $3,200 monthly. Here's what we decided to explore. What if Michael retired at 62, but both of them delayed claiming Social Security until 65? This gave them a few advantages. They could leave the workforce and start enjoying retirement immediately. But their Social Security benefits would grow while they lived off their portfolios strategically during those early years. This brings us to the most important calculation. How much can they actually withdraw from their $2 million portfolio? I walked them through this carefully. We're not going to use some simple rule of thumb. We're going to think about it intelligently. First, I separated their accounts by tax status. The Roth accounts, Michael's $35,000 and Susan's $20,000, those are special. Money comes out tax-free. We can tap those without any tax consequence. That's $55,000 of pure untaxed withdrawals available. Their traditional accounts, the 401k and traditional IRA combined, those are about $1,520,000. Withdrawals from these create taxable income, which matters for their tax planning. The taxable brokerage account with $450,000, withdrawals here might create capital gains taxes depending on how the account is invested. If it's mostly stocks with built-in gains, that matters. If it's mostly in positions where they've lost money, that's actually helpful. Their savings account of $50,000 sits there as an emergency buffer. We preserved that. Now here's the framework we used. They need $95,000 per year. Over the next few years until they claim Social Security at 65, they'll need to draw from their portfolio to make up any gap. Once they both claim Social Security at 65, those benefits will cover a meaningful portion of their needs, and then we can reduce the portfolio withdrawals accordingly. Let me walk through the years. Year 1 of retirement. Michael is 62, Susan is 61. Neither is claiming Social Security yet. They need $95,000 for their lifestyle. We drew that from their taxable brokerage account. Why? Because the brokerage account has more tax flexibility, and we wanted to preserve their Roth for emergencies. We kept this going for 3 more years. Each year we withdrew about $95,000. That's $380,000 total drawn from their investments in those 4 years. But here's where planning gets sophisticated. In year 5, Michael turns 67 and Susan is 66. Now both are claiming Social Security. Michael is getting about $2,800 per month because he claimed early. Susan is getting about $3,200 per month. Combined, that's roughly $3,600 per month, or around $43,200 per year. Now their portfolio only needs to make up the difference. They still want to spend $95,000, but Social Security is covering $43,200. The portfolio only needs to provide $51,800 per year. You see how that changes things? That's significantly less stress on the portfolio. That's what they needed to understand. With $2 million in assets, drawing down roughly $95,000 in the early years and $52,000 in the later years, we have to think about investment returns. If they earn 5% average annual returns on their portfolio, which is reasonable for a balanced allocation of stocks and bonds, the portfolio has a very high likelihood of sustaining these withdrawals for 30 or 40 years. The math works, but it requires discipline. We also talked about taxes because taxes matter. We did tax loss harvesting in their brokerage account to offset any capital gains. We coordinated their withdrawals from different account types to minimize their overall tax bill. We calculated their Medicare premiums carefully because income in certain years affects what they'll pay for health insurance. All of these moving pieces have to work together. And I told them something really important. This plan assumes they don't make major changes to their spending. If they consistently spend $95,000 a year in the early years and reduce to $52,000 in later years, when Social Security is flowing, they'll be fine. But if they decide to take a splurge year and spend $130,000, that affects the math. Not catastrophically, but it matters. We also discussed flexibility. If the stock market has a terrible year in year 3 of their retirement, do they cut back on spending? Do they take fewer expensive trips? Or do they trust that the market will recover and their long-term plan accounts for volatility? We discussed the sequence of returns risk, the danger that poor market returns early in retirement can disproportionately impact the longevity of their portfolio. What we concluded is this. Michael and Susan can retire at 62 with confidence. They can spend the lifestyle they actually want. They don't have to work another day if they don't want to. The portfolio is large enough, their Social Security is substantial enough, and their spending is reasonable enough that the math works. But none of this would have been clear if we just looked at the $2 million number and said, "Congratulations, that's enough." We had to do the work. We had to understand their goals. We had to understand their expected Social Security benefits. We had to look at their taxes. We had to model different scenarios. This is what I want you to understand. Your portfolio number alone is not the answer. The right question to ask yourself is this: can my portfolio, combined with my Social Security, my pension if I have one, and my spending needs, create a sustainable plan for retirement? If you're in a similar situation, I encourage you to sit down and do this work. Look at your actual expenses. Understand your Social Security benefits by creating an account at ssa.gov. Know your asset breakdown between Roth, traditional, and taxable accounts. Understand your tax situation. Then run some scenarios. Talk to a professional if you can. But most importantly, get clarity. Michael and Susan tell me that clarity was the best gift they gave themselves. They came in anxious and they left with a plan. They knew they could retire. They knew how much they could spend. And they could actually enjoy that retirement without spending it worried about money. That's what I want for you. Thank you for watching.